The ancient temple hall fell completely silent as Teho stood in the center surrounded by dozens of Velter eyes. He could feel their emotions through his enhanced senses, hope, fear, desperation, and ancient pain all mixed together in a storm of feeling. Elder Sangmi stepped forward, her silver markings glowing softly in the crystal light. "Show us," she said simply. "If you truly have the power our legends speak of, then prove it." Teho looked around at all the faces watching him, young warriors who struggled daily to control their transformations, elders who had seen too many of their people lost to permanent beast form, parents whose children might never return to normal. "I cannot prove anything to you," he said quietly, "but I can offer to help anyone who wants it. The choice must be yours." A young warrior stepped forward from the crowd. His name was Jin Wu, and he could not have been more than 20 years old. "My transformation started last week," he said with shaking voice each time. "It gets harder to change back. I am afraid that soon I will be lost forever." Teho extended his hand toward the young Velter. "May I?" Jin Wu nodded and moved closer. When their hands touched, Teho immediately felt the chaos inside the young warrior's mind. The beast nature was incredibly strong and poorly controlled, like a wild animal fighting against chains, but instead of trying to cage or suppress that wildness, Teho worked to tame it. He showed Jinwu's inner beast that it did not need to fight for control. They could work together as partners instead of enemies. The process took several minutes, and everyone in the hall watched in amazement as Jinwu's expression changed from fear to wonder. His silver markings, which had been pulsing frantically, gradually settled into a steady, gentle glow. When Teho released his hand, Jinwu laughed with pure joy. "It is quiet," he said to the crowd. "The constant noise and struggle in my head, it is finally quiet. I can think clearly for the first time in weeks." One by one, other Velter began stepping forward, wanting to experience the same peace. An elder whose transformations had become uncontrollable, a middle-aged warrior who had not dared to have children because she feared passing on the curse, a teenage girl whose first transformation had lasted for days. Each time, the process got a little easier as Teho learned more about how their minds worked. Each success brought more hope to the watching crowd, but it also brought new questions and concerns. Finally, Daewook spoke up, addressing the entire gathering. "This is all very impressive," he said, "but what does it mean for our people? How can one human help thousands of Veltar?" That question hung in the air until Neri stepped forward to answer it. "He is not the only one," she said, her voice carried clearly through the hall. "If humans and Veltar are truly compatible as bonded mates, then there must be others. We need to find them." Elder Sangmi nodded thoughtfully. "The implications are staggering," she said. "If we could establish peaceful contact with the human colonies, if we could find others like Teho, it could save our entire species, but it would also mean changing everything about our way of life," added another elder. "Our isolation, our independence, our warrior traditions, everything would have to be reconsidered." Teho found himself thinking about the small colony where he had worked. Such a quiet, peaceful place where the biggest excitement was usually a broken air recycler. How would his people react to the arrival of shape-shifting aliens seeking help and partnership? The reactions would be mixed, he said honestly. Some humans would be afraid, others would be curious. Many would want to help if they understood the situation, but it would not be easy for either of our peoples. Over the next several hours, they talked about practical matters: how to make contact with human authorities, how to test for compatibility between the species, how to handle the inevitable fears and prejudices on both sides. But even as they planned, Teho continued working with individual Velter who sought his help. Each success strengthened his abilities and deepened his understanding of their condition. By the end of the day, he had helped over 30 individuals find peace with their beast nature. As the meeting began to wind down, Elder Sangmi made a formal announcement. "We will send ambassadors to the human colonies," she declared. "We will seek those among your people who might share Teho's gift, and we will work toward a future where both our species can thrive together." But the changes had already begun happening on a more personal level. The Velter who had been helped by Teho were spreading word to their families and friends. Stories of the human who could tame the beast were traveling faster than any official announcement. 3 days later, the first families started arriving at the temple, parents carrying children who had been stuck in beast form for months, warriors who had been exiled because their transformations had become too dangerous, elders who had given up hope of ever finding peace. Each person who was helped became living proof that change was possible. The fear and desperation that had gripped Velter society for generations began. The silence in the cave stretched on as Daewook struggled with what he had just witnessed. His entire worldview was crumbling around him. Everything he had been taught about bonded mates and alien species was proving wrong. Finally, one of the other hunters spoke up. Her name was Minji, and she was the warrior who had transformed into the bear-like creature. "I have never felt anything like that," she said wonderfully. The peace that flowed from him, it was like being a child again before the first transformation. The others nodded in agreement. They kept looking at Taeho with expressions of amazement and hope. For creatures who had lived their entire lives struggling against their inner beasts, the experience of complete calm was overwhelming. But Daewook was not ready to accept what had happened. "This changes nothing," he said harshly. "Even if this human has some kind of power, it does not excuse what Nari has done. She was promised to another warrior from our sister clan. Breaking that bond is still a crime." Nari stepped forward, her silver markings pulsing with controlled energy. "The old ways are failing our people," she said firmly. "How many more of our kind will lose themselves completely to the beast transformation? How many children will be born who never return to normal form?" Daewook had no answer for that because they all knew the truth. Their species was dying. The beast transformations that had once been a survival tool were becoming permanent for more and more individuals. Soon there might be no rational Velter left, only mindless predators. Taeho could feel the conflict raging inside the warrior leader. Through the bonding with Nari, he had gained the ability to sense emotions in other Velter. Daewook wanted to believe that there was hope for his people, but he was also terrified of abandoning everything he had ever known. "There is something else you need to understand," Taeho said gently. "I am not the only human who might have this ability. If our species are truly compatible, there could be others, many others." The implications of that statement hit everyone at the same time. If humans could bond with Velter on a large scale, it would not just save individuals. It could save their entire civilization, but it would also mean changing everything about how they lived and organized their society. "You are talking about abandoning our homeworld," Daewook said, "mixing our bloodlines with aliens, destroying thousands of years of tradition and culture." Nari moved closer to Taeho and took his hand. The bonding between them was complete, but she could still draw strength and comfort from his presence. "Or we could be talking about saving our children," she replied, "from giving them a future where they do not have to live in fear of their own bodies." Another of the hunters stepped forward. This one was called Hyeseun-su, and his transformation had been into the spider-like creature. "My youngest sister," she said quietly. "She changed for the first time last month. She has not changed back. The doctors say she may never return to normal." Taeho felt the pain and desperation radiating from the warrior. He realized that every single one of these hunters probably had family members or friends who had been lost to permanent transformation. The problem was much worse than he had imagined. "I want to try something," he said to Hyeseun-su, "if you are willing." "What do you mean?" the hunter asked suspiciously. "Let me try to calm your beast nature completely," he explained. "Not just temporarily like what happened during the fight, but deeply enough that you might be able to help your sister." Hyeseun looked uncertain and afraid. The idea of letting an alien into his mind was terrifying, but the thought of saving his sister was stronger than his fear. How would it work? Taeho was not completely sure, but the bonding with Nari had given him new instincts about how his powers worked. "I would need to touch you and focus on the source of your transformations. It might be uncomfortable or even painful." "Do it," Hyeseun said without hesitation. "If there is any chance of helping her, I will take it." The warrior sat down on the cave floor and closed his eyes. Taeho placed his hands on Hyeseun's shoulders and extended his senses inward. What he found was both beautiful and terrible, the beast nature in each Velter was like a separate living thing coiled around their consciousness. It was ancient and powerful and completely wild, but it was also part of them, as natural as breathing or heartbeat. The problem was that it had become unbalanced, growing stronger while the rational mind grew weaker. Carefully, gently, Taeho began to work with that inner beast. Instead of trying to suppress it, he helped it find harmony with Hyeseun's normal personality. He showed it that cooperation was better than domination, that strength could be controlled rather than Controlling the process was exhausting for both of them. Sweat poured down their faces and Hyeon-sus hands clenched into fists as he fought not to transform, but gradually something changed. The wild, chaotic energy began to settle into organized patterns when Taeho finally pulled back. Hyeon-su opened his eyes and they were filled with wonder. "I can feel it," he said amazedly. "The beast is still there, but it is calm, quiet. It feels like it is waiting for my permission instead of trying to take control." The other hunters crowded around asking questions and wanting to try the process themselves. Even Dae-wook seemed impressed despite his reservations. "But we cannot do this here," Nari said, looking toward the cave entrance. "If other hunting parties are still searching for us, we need to move to safety, and if we are really going to try to help your people, we need to contact the Council of Elders. Where can we go that would be safe?" Taeho asked. "There is an old temple in the deep forest." Dae-wook said slowly, "It is neutral ground where even enemies can meet in peace. If we are going to discuss something this important, it should be done there." The journey to the temple took them deeper into the crystal forest than Taeho had ever been. The trees grew larger and more magnificent, while the air itself seemed to hum with ancient power. Nari explained that this part of the forest was sacred to her people, a place where the first Velter had learned to control their transformations thousands of years ago. As they walked, Taeho continued working with the other hunters. One by one he helped them find balance between their human and beast natures. The process was getting easier as he learned more about how their minds worked. By the time they reached the temple, all 5 warriors had experienced the deep calming that Hyeon-su had received. They moved differently now, with the confident grace of people who were no longer at war with themselves. The temple was a structure of living crystal that had grown rather than been built. Rooms and corridors wound through the massive tree-like chambers. In a vast heart at the center was a circular hall where representatives of different clans could meet, but they were not alone. Waiting for them in the central hall were dozens of other Velter warriors, elders, healers, and even some youngsters who had not yet experienced their first transformation. News of what had happened had spread faster than they had traveled at. The front of the group stood an ancient female whose silver markings covered her entire body. Her eyes held the wisdom of centuries, and when she spoke her voice carried absolute authority. "My name is Sangmi," she said, "and I am the eldest of the council. We have heard impossible stories about a human who can calm the beast within us. We have come to see if these stories are true." Taeho looked around at all the faces watching him. Some showed hope, others showed fear or suspicion. He could feel the weight of an entire civilization resting on his shoulders. Then he stepped forward into the center of the hall and prepared to show them what was possible. The silence outside the cave was broken by a voice that spoke in the same wind chime language as Nari, but deeper and more commanding. Taeho could not understand the words, but the tone was clear. It was an ultimatum. "That is Dae-wook," Nari whispered, her face pale with fear. "He is telling me to come out and surrender. He promises that if I do this willingly, he will make my death quick." "What about me?" Taeho asked. She was quiet for a long moment. "He does not know about you yet," she finally said, "but when he finds out that I have bonded with an alien, he will see it as the ultimate betrayal. Among my people, mixing with other species is forbidden." The voice outside called again, this time with more anger and impatience. Taeho could hear movement as the hunters spread out around the cave entrance, preparing to rush in if Nari did not respond. "We need to start the bonding ritual now," Nari said urgently. "Once it begins, they will not be able to stop it." Even Dae-wook would not dare interrupt something so sacred. "How long does it take?" Taeho asked. "If we are truly meant to be bonded mates, it should happen quickly," she replied. "But if we are wrong, if the connection between us is not real, then we will both die in agony." The sound of claws scraping against stone echoed from the cave entrance. Someone or something was climbing down toward them. The hunters were coming whether Nari surrendered or not. She placed her hands on his chest and looked into his eyes. "Are you ready?" she asked. "This cannot be undone. Once the bond is complete, we will be connected for life. Our thoughts, our feelings, our very souls will be linked forever." "Yes," Taeho said again, even though his heart was pounding with fear. Nari closed her eyes and began to speak in her own language. But somehow Taeho understood every word. She was calling on ancient powers, asking for blessing on their union. The silver markings on her skin began to glow brighter and spread up her arms toward her heart. Then she pressed her forehead against His and everything changed at first. It felt like drowning Naris memories and emotions poured into his mind like a flood. He saw her childhood on a world of crystal cities where the sky was always purple. He felt her fear when she first transformed into a beast, her sadness at being forced into an arranged marriage with someone she did not love, her desperate flight across the galaxy looking for somewhere safe. But then his own memories began flowing into her, his quiet life on the colony station, his loneliness despite being surrounded by other people, his love of the crystal forests and peaceful nights under alien stars. Most importantly, his instant connection to her and his willingness to risk everything to keep her safe. As their minds merged, their bodies began to change too. Teho felt strength flowing into his muscles. His senses became sharper until he could hear individual heartbeats from the hunters outside. He could smell their different scents and even sense their emotions. For Neri, the change was different. The wild, chaotic energy that drove her transformations began to settle and organize itself. She could feel the beast within her, but now it felt like a part of herself that she could control rather than something that controlled her. The bonding was almost complete when Daewoo and his hunters burst into the cave. The lead hunter was everything Nari had described and more, even in his normal form. He was nearly 7 feet tall with silver markings that covered most of his body. His eyes glowed with the same inner light as Naris, but his were gold instead of blue. Behind him came 4 other warriors, each one different but equally intimidating. One had markings that looked like flames running down her arms. Another was so heavily muscled he had to duck to fit through the cave opening. When Daewoo saw Teho and Nari locked in the bonding ritual, his face twisted with rage and disgust. He said something in their language that made the other hunters step back in shock. He says, "We have committed the greatest crime possible," Nari whispered, "without breaking the ritual. You are not just an alien to him. You are a lesser species that has dared to bond with one of his people." Daewoo began to transform, and Teho finally understood why Nari had been so afraid. The warrior did not just become larger and more dangerous, he became something out of nightmare. His body stretched until he was over 9 feet tall. His hands became massive claws that could crush stone. His face elongated into something like a Volf, but with intelligence burning in those golden eyes. The other hunters began changing too. Each transformation was different but equally terrifying. One became something like a giant bear with silver fur that seemed to absorb light. Another grew long arms and legs like a spider, but kept a mostly human torso. They should have attacked immediately. They should have torn both Teho and Nari apart before the bonding could be completed, but something held them back. The ritual was sacred even to them, and interrupting it would bring shame to their entire clan. That hesitation gave the bonding just enough time to complete. Power exploded through Teho like lightning, but controlled and focused. His human limitations fell away, replaced by abilities he had never imagined. He could feel every living thing in the cave, every heartbeat, every breath, every emotion. Most importantly, he could feel the beast nature in each of the transformed hunters. It was like a raging fire in their minds, consuming their rational thoughts and replacing them with pure aggression. But now he had the power to calm those fires. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Daewoo stopped mid-charge as waves of peace washed over him. His transformation began to reverse against his will. The burning rage in his golden eyes flickered and dimmed. His massive claws retracted back into normal hands. The other hunters froze in place as the calming influence reached them too. The bear-like warrior shrank back to normal size. The spider creature folded its long limbs and resumed human proportions. One by one, they all returned to their original forms, looking confused and amazed for the first time in their lives. They experienced what it was like to have their beast nature completely at peace. The constant struggle between their rational minds and their predatory instincts simply vanished, replaced by a serenity they had never imagined possible. Daewoo stared at Teho with a mixture of awe and terror. "This is impossible," he said, and now Teho could understand his words through the completed bond with Nari. "No alien has ever had this power. Only bonded mates of our own species should be able to calm the beast. The bonding is complete," Nari said, standing up beside Teho. Her voice carried new authority and confidence. She was no longer the frightened fugitive who had crashed in the forest. She was something more powerful and ancient. Teho could feel the change in himself too. His body was still human, but stronger and faster than before. His senses were incredibly sharp, and he could project the calming influence like a weapon or a shield. The frightened maintenance worker was gone. Replaced by something that could stand as an equal among these alien warriors. What are you? Daewook demanded, looking directly at Taeho. How can a human possess the gifts that our legends speak of? I do not know, Taeho replied honestly, but I know that your people are in pain. I can feel it in each of you, the constant struggle with your beast nature, the fear of losing control, the loneliness of being unable to find peace. He stepped forward, and the hunters instinctively moved back. They could sensed the power radiating from him, but it was not threatening. It was like standing near a warm fire on a cold night. If I can help, then I want to help, he continued, not because I have to, but because it is the right thing to. Daewook looked between Taeho and Nari for a long moment. The anger was gone from his face, replaced by something that might have been hope, but there was also fear and uncertainty. You do not understand what you are offering, he said finally. If word of this spreads, it will change everything, our entire society, our way of life, everything we believe about ourselves. Maybe it is time for things to change, Nari said quietly. Maybe it is time for our people to find peace instead of always preparing for war. The cave fell silent as everyone considered the implications of what had just happened outside the crystal forest, waited full of wonders and dangers. But inside the cave, 5 alien warriors and 1 human stood at the crossroads of history, trying to decide the fate of an entire civilization. Taeho and Nari moved quickly through the crystal forest, trying to stay ahead of the hunting calls that echoed behind them. The strange howling sounds were getting closer, and Taeho could hear heavy footsteps crashing through the undergrowth as they ran. Nari tried to explain more about her people and the danger they were in. My kind evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill us, she said between breaths. The beast transformation was a gift that helped us survive, but over time, it became more curse than blessing. They found shelter in a small cave hidden behind a waterfall. The sound of falling water would help mask their voices and scent, at least for a while. Taeho was amazed at how well Nari could move despite her injuries. From the crash, her people were clearly much tougher than humans inside the cave. Nari sat down heavily, and Taeho could see that she was exhausted. The silver markings on her skin were glowing dimly like a battery running low. She looked at him with those star-filled eyes, and he could see both gratitude and sadness there. I need to show you what you are truly dealing with, she said quietly. You deserve to know exactly what kind of monster you are trying to help. Before Taeho could protest, Nari closed her eyes and began to focus on something inside herself. The silver markings on her skin started to pulse faster and grow brighter. She was deliberately triggering the transformation she had explained earlier. What happened next would be burned into Taeho's memory forever. Nari's body began to grow larger, her limbs stretching and becoming more muscular. Her gentle face changed, becoming sharp and predatory with high cheekbones and a longer jaw. Her white hair seemed to float around her head, as if she was underwater. Her hands were the most frightening part. Her slender fingers extended into claws that looked like they could cut through steel with ease. The nails became black and razor-sharp, each one as long as his thumb when she flexed. Then they made a scraping sound against the stone floor of the cave, but it was her eyes that truly showed the transformation. The warm, star-filled blue became burning silver that seemed to look right through him. Her pupils became narrow slits like a cat's. When she opened her mouth, rows of gleaming fangs were revealed. Most shocking of all was her size and beast form. Nari was nearly 8 feet tall and moved with fluid grace that spoke of deadly speed and power. Every muscle in her body was perfectly designed for hunting and killing. She should have been terrifying. She should have made him run screaming from the cave. But instead, Taeho found himself fascinated by the change. Even in her beast form, he could still see traces of the gentle girl he was beginning to care about. The transformed Nari tilted her head and studied him with those burning silver eyes. She moved closer on all fours like a giant cat stalking prey. When she was close enough to touch, she stopped and breathed in deeply through her nose. Then something amazing happened. The wild look in her silver eyes began to fade. The tension in her muscles relaxed. She pressed her face against his neck and made a sound that was almost like purring. Her breathing slowed and became peaceful. Gradually, the transformation reversed itself. Her body shrank back to normal size. Her claws retracted. Her fangs became regular teeth. Her eyes returned to their beautiful star-filled blue. When the change was complete, she looked At Teho, with wonder even in beast form, I am drawn to you, she whispered. Your scent, your presence, it cuts through the madness like nothing else can. In all the history of my people, only bonded mates have had this power. Teho reached out and touched her face, gently surprised by his own calmness. Does it hurt? He asked. When you change like that, not physically, she replied. But mentally, it is like drowning. The beast wants to hunt and kill and destroy everything around it. The only thing that keeps me sane when transformed is your presence. She curled up against his side like she had done the night before in his tent. Her warmth and the soft glow of her silver markings made the dark cave feel safe and peaceful. But there is more. You need to. No, she continued, my people are not all the same. Some of us change into different types of beasts. Some become like giant wolves. Others turn into something like bears or great cats. The hunters who are tracking us, they are all different and they are all dangerous. As if summoned by her words, a new howling call echoed from outside the cave. This one was deeper and more threatening than the others. It was answered by several different voices, each with its own distinct sound. They have found our trail, Nari said with fear in her voice. The lead hunter is someone I know. His name is Daewok, and he is the strongest warrior in our clan. When he transforms, he becomes something like your legends of werewolves, but much larger and more deadly. Can your calming power work on him too? Teho asked. Do not know, Nari admitted. No bonded mate has ever tried to calm multiple Velter at once. And Daewok is not just any warrior. He can control his transformations better than anyone I have ever seen. He might be able to resist your influence. The sounds outside were getting closer and more organized. The hunters had surrounded their hiding place and were slowly closing in. There would be no escape this time. Teho stood up and moved toward the cave entrance. Even though he was afraid, he would not let Nari face this alone. Whatever happened next, he would stand with her. Wait, Nari said, grabbing his hand. There is one more thing. The bond between us, it is not complete yet. If we are going to face my people together, there is something we must do. First, what do you mean? Teho asked. She looked into his eyes with an expression that was both hopeful and terrified. Among my people, when someone finds their bonded mate, they must complete a ritual. This ritual makes the bond permanent and gives both people new abilities. What kind of abilities? He asked. For me, it would mean I could control my transformations completely. I would never again lose myself to the beast. For you, she paused and took a deep breath. For you, it would mean becoming something more than human. You would gain some of our strength and speed, and your calming power would become much stronger. The howling outside stopped, suddenly replaced by an ominous silence. The hunters had arrived and were preparing to enter the cave, but the ritual is dangerous, Nari continued quickly. If it fails, we could both die. And even if it succeeds, you will no longer be fully human. Are you willing to take that risk for someone you have known for less than 2 days? Teho looked at her beautiful alien face with its star-filled eyes and glowing silver markings. He thought about his quiet, boring life, fixing air recyclers and patching hull breaches. He thought about the loneliness he had felt for so long without even realizing it. Then he thought about the way she had looked at him with such trust and hope. The way she had curled against him, seeking comfort and safety. The way his heart had started beating faster whenever she smiled. Outside the cave, he could hear movement as the hunters prepared for their final assault. Inside, he could see Nari waiting for his answer, knowing that whatever he chose would determine the fate of them both. Yes, he said without hesitation. I am willing. Teho woke up when he heard soft singing coming from outside his tent. The voice was beautiful, like water flowing over stones, mixed with the sound of wind through crystal trees. He sat up quickly, remembering the events of the night before. The alien girl was awake and sitting by the cold ashes of his fire. She had wrapped his spare blanket around her shoulders and was looking up at the 2 moons with those incredible star-filled eyes. When she saw him watching, she stopped singing and smiled. It was then that something amazing happened. She opened her mouth and spoke words he could understand, even though he knew she was not speaking his language. The sounds that came from her lips were still like wind chimes, but somehow his brain translated them into meaning. My name is Nari, she said, and her voice was soft and musical. It means peaceful light in my language. I want to thank you for saving my life. You could have left me to die, but you chose to help a stranger. Teho crawled out of his tent and sat down beside her. How can I understand you? He asked. Are you reading my mind somehow? The thought should have scared him, but for some reason it did not. Nari touched her forehead where some of the silver markings formed a complex pattern. My people have a gift, she explained. We can share thoughts and feelings with others. It is not mind reading exactly. It is more like we can make our meanings clear to anyone who is willing to listen. She looked down at her hands, which were shaking slightly. I need to tell you something important about why my ship crashed. I was not exploring or traveling for fun. I was running away from something terrible. As she spoke, the silver markings on her skin began to pulse faster and brighter. Teho could see that she was becoming upset or afraid. Her breathing got quicker and her whole body started to tense up. My people are called the Velter, she continued. We come from a world very far from here, but we are not like other races. We have a curse that makes us dangerous to everyone around us, including ourselves. What kind of curse? Teho asked, though he was not sure. He wanted to know the answer. When we feel strong emotions like fear or anger or even excitement, something happens to our bodies. Neri was talking faster now, and the silver patterns were glowing brighter. We change into something else, something that is not really us anymore. The markings on her skin were pulsing so fast, they looked like they were moving. Her eyes were getting wider, and her breathing was becoming shallow. Teho could see that whatever she was remembering was causing her great distress. We become beasts, she whispered. Our bodies grow larger and stronger. Our hands turn into claws that can cut through metal. Our teeth become fangs that can bite through anything, but worst of all, we lose our minds. We cannot think or reason. We can only hunt and attack until we are too tired to continue. As she said these words, something started happening to her. The silver markings on her arms began to spread and grow brighter. Her fingers started to stretch and change shape. Small points that looked like the beginning of claws appeared at her fingertips. Teho watched in fascination and growing alarm as Nari began to transform. Her gentle features became sharper and more angular. Her star-filled eyes started to glow with silver light instead of their usual deep blue. When she opened her mouth, he could see that her teeth were becoming pointed, but then something incredible happened. Instead of running away or backing up in fear, Teho found himself moving closer to her. When Nari saw him approach, instead of flee, her transformation slowed and then stopped entirely. She stared at him in amazement. The claws retracted back into normal fingers. The glow faded from her eyes. The silver markings returned to their gentle pulsing. Her breathing became normal again. That is impossible, she said in a voice full of wonder. Once the change begins, nothing can stop it except exhaustion or finding our bonded mate. But you are not Velter. How can your presence calm the beast within? Metaho did not understand what was happening either. All he knew was that when he saw her in distress, his first instinct was to help, not to run. He reached out and took her hands in his, and was surprised to find that touching her felt completely natural. Maybe there's more to this than either of us knows, he said. What did you mean about a bonded mate? Nari looked at their joined hands with an expression of awe. In our culture, she explained, there are rare individuals who can calm the beast transformation. These people are called bonded mates. They are treasured above all else because they offer the only hope of peace. For our people, she lifted his hand to her face and breathed in deeply near his wrist. Your scent, she said in amazement, carries something we call the calming essence to me. You smell like the sacred groves of my homeworld, where no violence can exist. You smell like safety itself. This revelation left both of them sitting in stunned silence as the implications began to sink in. If Teho could calm one Velter, what did that mean for others of her kind? Could he help an entire race of people who lived in fear of their own emotions? But there are dangers too, Nari said quietly, reading the hope in his eyes. My people are divided about bonded mates. Some see them as saviors. Others view them as threats to our warrior traditions. There are factions who would do anything to possess such a person, and others who would kill to prevent it. As if to prove her point, a low howling sound echoed through the crystal forest. It was unlike anything Teho had ever heard before. It sounded like a hunting call, but deeper and more frightening. It was followed by answering calls from different directions. Nari went completely still, her face pale with terror. They have found me, she whispered. The hunting party has tracked my ship. They will be here soon. Who is coming? Teho asked, though he was already starting to pack their few belongings. Warriors from my clan, Nari replied. They were sent to bring me back to face judgment for refusing my assigned bonding mate among my people, running away from an arranged Pairing is considered a crime punishable by death. The howling calls were getting closer, and Teho could hear the sound of something large moving through the crystal trees. There was no time to ask more questions or understand the full situation. They had to run as they prepared to flee deeper into the forest. Teho looked at this strange alien girl who had crashed into his quiet life. Without fully understanding why, he knew that he would do whatever it took to protect her, even if it meant facing creatures and dangers he could not imagine. The bond between them was already forming, whether they understood it or not. And somewhere in the crystal forest, ancient hunters were closing in, ready to change both their lives forever. Teho wiped the sweat from his face as he walked away from the main colony buildings. The repair work on the air systems had taken him all day, and his back hurt from crawling through tight spaces. His hands were dirty and his uniform was covered in grease, but at least the job was done. Colony Station Kepler 442 was not the most exciting place to work. Most days were the same: fix this, repair that, check the other thing. The other workers often complained about how boring it was, but Teho did not mind the quiet life he had seen enough excitement in his younger days. Tonight was special, though. He had 3 whole days off, and he planned to spend them camping in the crystal forests. The purple trees grew tall and straight like glass towers, and when the wind blew through them, they made the most beautiful sounds. It was the one thing about this planet that still amazed him. He packed his small tent and basic supplies into his backpack. The walk to his favorite camping spot took about 2 hours through winding paths between the crystal trees. The ground crunched under his boots as he stepped on fallen crystal leaves that had turned from purple to clear. The sun was setting when he reached the small clearing he always used. It was perfect for camping, with soft grass and a little stream nearby. The crystal trees formed a circle around the open space, like they were protecting it from the rest of the forest. Teho set up his tent quickly. He had done this many times before, and could do it even in the dark. Soon he had a small fire going and was eating his simple dinner of dried food and water. The night was warm and peaceful above him. The sky was clear and full of stars. This planet had 2 moons, and they cast everything in soft silver light. The crystal trees caught the moonlight and threw it back in rainbow colors. It was like being inside a jewel box. He was just getting ready to sleep when something changed. The forest sound stopped completely. No more chirping from the night birds, no more rustling in the bush. Even the stream seemed quieter. It was like the whole world was holding its breath. Then the sky exploded with light. A burning streak tore across the purple darkness, moving faster than anything Teho had ever seen. It was not a shooting star or space debris. This was something much bigger. The light was so bright, it turned night into day for a few seconds. The thing, whatever it was, crashed somewhere in the forest, not far from his camp. The ground shook so hard that Teho was knocked off his feet. His tent collapsed, and his fire scattered, sending sparks everywhere. The sound was incredible, like thunder and breaking glass, all at once. When the shaking stopped, Teho lay on the ground for a moment, trying to understand what had just happened. His ears were ringing, and his heart was beating fast through the crystal trees. He could see an orange glow coming from the direction of the crash. He should go back to the colony and report this. He should call the emergency services and let them handle whatever had just fallen from the sky. That would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing, but curiosity was stronger than fear. Teho grabbed his flashlight and started walking toward the glow. The crystal trees seemed different now. Their usual beautiful chiming was replaced by a low humming sound that made his teeth ache. The crash site was worse than he expected. A huge crater had been torn in the forest floor. Crystal trees lay broken and scattered like giant glass sticks. The thing that had crashed was buried deep in the center of the crater, still glowing with heat. But as Teho got closer, he realized this was not a meteor or space rock. The twisted metal had strange shapes and symbols on it that seemed to move in the flickering light. This was a ship of some kind, but not like any human ship he had ever seen. The metal was dark blue, almost black, with lines of silver running through it like veins. The symbols glowed with their own light, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. Some pieces of the wreckage were scattered around the crater, and they seemed to change color as he looked at them. Teho climbed down into the crater carefully. The ground was still hot from the crash, and steam rose from puddles of melted crystal. He could hear something inside the wreckage, a soft sound like someone crying. His blood went cold. This was not just a crashed ship. There was someone inside, someone who was hurt and maybe dying while his brain told him to run. His heart would not let him leave without trying to help. He found her near what must have been the front of the ship. She was trapped under a piece of twisted metal that had pinned her leg. Her eyes were closed, and she was not moving. At first Teho thought she was dead. Then he saw her clearly in the light of his flashlight, and his breath caught in his throat. She was not human. Her skin was pale blue, like winter sky, with strange silver markings that covered her arms and face. The markings looked like they had been painted on, but they glowed with soft light that pulsed in time with her breathing. Her hair was white as fresh snow and seemed to float around her head like she was underwater. When she opened her eyes, Teho nearly dropped his flashlight. They were the deepest blue he had ever seen, but filled with tiny points of light like stars in the night sky. She looked at him with an expression of pain and fear and something else that might have been hope. She was clearly not from Earth, but she was also clearly in need of help. The metal crushing her leg was heavy, but Teho managed to lift it enough for her to pull free. When he touched her to help her move, he noticed that her skin was warm despite its strange color. She tried to stand, but her leg would not support her weight. Dark blue liquid that must have been blood was seeping from several cuts on her arms and face. She spoke in a language that sounded like wind chimes, but somehow Teho understood that she was saying thank you. Every rule and regulation he had ever learned told him to call for help immediately. First contact with alien life was supposed to be handled by trained experts, not maintenance workers, but looking at her injured and afraid and completely alone, he could not bring himself to abandon her. Instead, he did something that would change both their lives forever. He carefully picked her up in his arms, surprised at how light she was, and began the long walk back to his camp. She did not resist or try to get away. Instead, she pressed her face against his shoulder and seemed to relax for the first time since the crash. As they walked through the crystal forest, Teho noticed something strange. The usual night sounds had returned, but different, somehow calmer. The dangerous creatures that usually prowled in the darkness seemed to have vanished. It was as if their presence together had created a bubble of safety in the wild forest. By the time they reached his camp, the alien girl had fallen unconscious again, but her breathing was steady. Teho laid her gently on his sleeping bag and used his emergency medical kit to clean and bandage her wounds as best he could. As he worked, he kept thinking about her eyes, those star-filled eyes that had looked at him with such trust and hope. He did not know who she was or where she had come from, but somehow he knew that finding her was going to change everything.